Hello, everyone, and welcome to a live stream from Craft Quest. I'm Ryan Ireland, and thanks for joining us. Today, it's a special edition of the live stream, and I have a special guest. You may know him from his plugins for Craft CMS, and you may be familiar with perhaps Blitz, or maybe you've added reactivity to your own site using Sprig. He's also done campaign, snapshot, all sorts of things that my guest Ben Croker has done. Hello, Ben. How are you doing? Welcome to the live stream.
Hey Ryan, good to be back. It's been a while.
It has been. We were talking right before the live stream. You had mentioned that you think it's been a year since we did a live stream together. Is that right?
I had a quick look and I think it was October last year.
Okay.
My hair was all grown out because of lockdown.
That's right.
Back in those days.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you're joining us from a undisclosed remote location in the middle of an ocean.
Correct.
You're not on a boat because you're not rocking back and forth. Well, that
No,
would be
I'm
cool if
on
you
a
had like
big
a
rock.
stabilizing gear, right? Like it's like the stoves in boats. You know how they're on like a swivel or something like that. Anyway,
Yes.
so Ben, you're not here to hear me talk about stuff I don't know anything about, which is boating. We're here to talk about because of Blitz, which is one of your plugins, which is a caching plugin for Craft, and then Sprig. So
Yes.
let's set the table for everyone. I use Blitz to statically cache pages or URLs on my site because I want the fastest performance possible. But I still want to use Sprig to insert maybe some dynamic content. And it seems like that there could be a problem there. And you want to talk about how you can do that. And not maybe just with Blitz, but Sprig with statically cached pages.
That's right.
Yeah. Does that sound about what we're going to talk about?
That's what we're going to talk about. Yeah.
All right. So
Where do we begin?
I think we should, since we're going to use Blitz as the example, let's talk about Blitz and what it is and what it does. And then you can kind of go into how someone could solve this.
Sure. Okay. So should I take the helm?
Go for it. It's all yours, Captain.
Yeah, so as you correctly pointed out, Blitz is a tool that we use for statically caching pages. And why would we want to do this? Well, to speed up our sites. That's essentially what it comes down to. And this may not be the correct solution for every site. Like I believe on Craft Quest, I don't think you're using static cache pages. You're possibly using the cache tag, but maybe it's a site that you don't need to because you're serving a lot of videos and you have a lot of dynamic content. And
Correct. Yeah.
if people are watching a half-hour video or even a 5-minute video, they're not going to be bothered about the page taking a second to load rather than a tenth of a second. But there are situations and types of websites that speed is important and performance is important. So one of the factors is speed, but the other one, of course, is bandwidth and load on the server. You can greatly reduce the load on a server by just serving HTML files, which is essentially what we're doing when we statically cache a page. So the big difference when you use static caching, and it's full page static caching, this is very important to differentiate between partial template caching, which is what Craft's cache tag uses. So you can kind of, with Craft's cache tag, right, you can say, well, this piece of the template, just cache this, just cache the output of this. Mm-hmm. And you can do that several times within a single template. But the big difference between that and full page static caching is that PHP has to be fired up, Craft has to do its whole execution process, and the bits that are of the template that are cached will just be rendered very quickly. But everything else still happens. All of the events are triggered, and that entire process has to run. With static page caching, that doesn't necessarily have to happen because as soon as we notice that this page is cached, we just serve it back as quickly as possible, reducing the server response time essentially. In SEO terms, this is known as time to first byte. And that's important. Like, that's only one of the metrics of performance. But time to first byte is important because that is a measurement of the first byte of code, of HTML code that comes back from the server. And until we get that, we're not able to display anything to the user, and we're not even able to start, downloading the static resources like CSS and JavaScript.
It's the beginning of the waterfall if you ever look at the graph.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And if you don't get that first byte, then you can't even begin the waterfall. So the browser cannot do anything until that first byte comes back.
So we have our page. Let's say it's the Craft Quest homepage, right? Which doesn't have any dynamic content on it. And I cache that, statically cache it, but I want to do something. I want to add something dynamic to it. When I've done it statically cached, right? I'm out of the rendering a twig template thing, right? Is that the case then?
Yeah, the template is no longer rendering because it has already rendered in the past, and the output of that rendering has been cached. And what you as the user will end up receiving is the cached version of that page. So essentially, we've taken a dynamic CMS, which is Crafts, and we've made it the output of that static. So why would you want to do such a thing? Well, there are multiple benefits. So performance, reducing server load. Another nice byproduct of that is that if you deploy some code and you accidentally take your site down, so you have like a PHP error in one of your plugins or modules, and let's say visiting the control panel, your site is completely down. If that static cached page already exists, then that may continue working. So the server is still able to serve the front end of the site, and any errors that might occur, or if you're maybe doing maintenance and updating the version of Craft, for example, sometimes that can take your site down for small periods of time. Your site will continue running because it's being served via the cache rather than via Craft directly.
So what is the optimal response time for a typical page? And I know that we all kind of play by the rules of whatever Google says, because they're the ones that, it's one of their signals that they use is page speed. But what would be like, what are you aiming for? Like, if you were looking at your page speed and you're thinking about adding cache in, and what are you looking for there?
So you're totally right. Like, Google sets the rules when it comes to search engine optimization, because everybody wants to optimize for Google's algorithms, and nobody really knows what Google's algorithms are, but they do say that the server response time should be under 200 milliseconds, and that's kind of what we're going for. And depending on your hosting setup and your DevOps and how you've set up your server environment, it's difficult because it's also relative, but I've seen server response times of a simple page served by Craft from anywhere from 300 seconds up to like 600. And then as you start, piling on the queries and the dynamic parts of the page, that can go up and up and up. But we'll look at some examples, but the target that we're going for is at most 200 milliseconds.
Okay. So you have on your site, you have a graph here. It kind of spells that out with like typical, and 600 milliseconds is an example like of what it could be without caching, and then how you can decrease that with a caching tool like Blitz.
Exactly. Yeah. And obviously these numbers are subjective and relative depending on your setup, but these are, on average, the kinds of speeds that I've experienced and noticed over time, and that's what we're aiming for, and possibly, like, in the best case scenario, get much lower than 200 milliseconds. I think my website, Put Your Lights On, again, it's there's a CDN, so it depends where you're geographically located, and depends on your internet's latency and a bunch of factors, right? There's no absolutes here. But I've gotten that under 100 milliseconds, and that's a really nice baseline to have, because anything under 100 milliseconds feels almost instantaneous. So your website, navigating a website, and it feels almost instantaneous is that's the ideal. That's what we're pushing for.
You get the people what they want as fast as possible, and then they'll stick around.
Exactly. But it's not all positives, because static caching has its downsides as well. And that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at, okay, well, if you make everything static, how do you make your website still dynamic? And even CraftQuest, I think in the top right, I don't have it up in front of me, but you have a login button, right? And if you're logged in, then it says something different.
Right. Yeah. So I have to be careful that I'm not statically caching that. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's the issue, right? And that's what we're going to look at today. So how do you deal with situations like that? And that's a common use case. Another one might be if it's an e-commerce site and you have a shopping cart, you might have a symbol up in the top right, for example, and maybe when their items are added to the cart, you want that number to increment. So that's another example where you want dynamic elements contained within a statically cached page.
All right, so that's possible then. We can do that with something with Sprig. We can ignore Andrew.
Yeah, I'm smiling because I'm seeing these comments, and I know he's just trying to put me off.
If anyone sees me smiling, it's because Andrew is dropping things in the chat during the live stream. So that's possible, because that is something that I've run into with CraftQuest, is exactly what you said, right? The little badge on the top right, and I have to be really careful that I'm not accidentally serving people other people's information. And I've seen one time where there was somebody who hadn't done a lot with caching had cached a page with like a contact form, and then the last cached version had somebody's information in it. So there's all sorts of things you have to watch out for. So this is great. So maybe I can take what I learn here in this live stream and apply it to CraftQuest. That'd be fantastic.
Well, that would be great. That's the idea here. And I want to say this doesn't only apply to Blitz, right? So Blitz we're going to use as an example because it's a very popular Craft plugin, if I do say so myself. But your CraftQuest is hosted on served.host, right? So I think served has its own static caching. I don't know if it's a plugin. I assume it's a plugin, but it's part of the served ecosystem. And you can use Varnish, and you can use other plugins that also exist in the plugin store. So I don't want to say that this applies only to Blitz. The methods that we will use and how we'll use Sprig applies to any methods of static caching.
Yeah, we have some people saying in the chat, Ben, I won't name names, although it is in the chat, but so Steve says, I've literally done that. I assume Steve is referring to accidentally caching a form. Andrew says she accidentally did that on a membership site. It cached stuff from a particular member, and there's others way able to see it. It's pretty common, but I know there's ways of just caching particular parts of a template, but we're talking about fully static cached pages, and we're going to use Sprig to inject dynamic content into it.
Yes.
I don't think this is possible.
Well, I admire your skepticism.
Okay.
Good. It's healthy.
Healthy
skepticism is good. Yeah.
Yep. So
shall we look at some code?
You want me to share your screen with everyone?
Yeah, bring it up.
Right. You must have it up because your face just lit up from the white screen. All right. So I see a nice product landing page here. So tell us what's going on here.
So this is just a Tailwind UI components that I kind of slapped together, and we have a general landing page. It might be a home page, but see if you can pick out some of the dynamic aspects of it. So if we wanted to statically cache this page, what might some of the issues be?
Well, the same thing we were talking about that I have on CraftQuest, right? That the badge for my account. The email. I'm not sure if if that would be a problem. I don't know how that works.
Hmm.
But those would be the first two things that I see.
Right. Right. So this is the thing that we spoke about earlier. Obviously, you don't want my face showing up for another user, or especially somebody who's not even logged in. So this really should switch to log in when this is not an authenticated user. You're right that the form could be an issue as well, and the reason for that is that when we post, so this site is actually has the campaign plugin installed, and that allows you to subscribe contacts to a mailing list, and that's what this form is. But that's not so important. But one of the policies or security policies in Craft is that it uses a CSRF token, which is a cross-site request forgery token, to avoid that particular security vulnerability. And we can see that if I inspect the code, there is going to be this hidden input field. Let me bump up the text size. And the name of that is craft underscore CSRF underscore token. And this has to be supplied along with a form submission when this is a posted form. And that is a security requirement. And if that doesn't happen, then this form submission will be stopped by Craft or by Yi under the hood, and it won't be allowed through.
You get like
And
I'm not sure what the error is. It a 403, a 401? It's one of those.
it's something like that.
Yeah, I've had that happen where I've actually accidentally cached a page, and then the form, I didn't have people's information in the form, but the form would not submit because of the CSRF
Right.
token.
So if I switch that value, or if I even delete this token, doesn't really matter which I do, and try to submit this form, we should see the error that you're talking about.
400. Yep.
Now I'm seeing this because dev mode is switched on. Normally it would be the kind of modal dialogue looking thing without this stack trace. So why is this an issue? Like if we statically cache this page, then we would statically cache the CSRF token. Why is that an issue? Well, the reason it's an issue is that the CSRF token is actually also stored as a cookie in my browser window, and it's linked to me as a user. So if I'm logged in and this page is statically cached with a CSRF token that was generated for me, if another user tried to submit the form with that same CSRF token, then they would see that error message that we just saw. And that means that this CSRF token, in theory, needs to be dynamically generated on a per user basis. But either way, it's something that we cannot statically cache without negatively impacting this page. And that's something that, if you don't know about in advance, I've made that mistake in the past where I've forgotten to make part of the page dynamic, and I've run into that issue. And it's a difficult one to track because, if I test it and that CSRF token was generated initially for me, then everything will seem like it's totally fine. But it's only when a different user comes and tries to submit this form that it will fail. And the third one that you wouldn't have even seen because I hadn't scrolled down this far is that we're kind of displaying a random selection of articles. There's you, Ryan. I don't know if you spot yourself. Oops, sorry.
Oh, that was after our city tour that Andrea organized. Very cool.
Yes. So here the idea is that we see a random selection of articles, and by random, like each time you refresh the page, this should re-render and show different articles. That's the idea. So this is also a dynamic part of the page. So not something that we could statically cache. Now, in saying that, we could use different strategies. Let's say maybe for this part of the page, it would be fine for these to randomize themselves once every hour. Then we could set up maybe a console command or a cron job, that refreshes the cache once per hour. But that's not really what we want here. We want here that each time I refresh the page, we get a new selection of articles at random. So there are these three aspects of the page, and we're going to deal with these one by one. Does that make sense so far?
It does, yeah. That makes complete sense. Are you going to walk through how Blitz is caching that, or is that pretty straightforward? What Blitz is doing?
Okay, let's do that. Yeah,
Yeah.
this page is not yet cached. That's why
Okay.
each time I refresh, we get a random selection. But I have my trusty debug toolbar here, which I highly recommend use for doing this kind of stuff. So I'll just refresh the page with that open so we kind of get a baseline reading. I'm seeing a time of, on average, 1.2, 1.3 seconds, which is pretty slow, but it's okay because dev mode is on, and I'm using Nitro, and I'm working locally with a bunch of plugins because this is one of my testing environments. So it's okay that we're getting a slow time, but this is significantly slow, let's be honest. And if I look at the database query count, we've got 42 queries just to render this page. And what I didn't show you actually, and I can, no, we'll stay here for a moment and then we'll jump into the code editor. But these things don't really exist, right? These are not entries. This is just, I pull this down from Tailwind UI and put it into a Twig template. The only part of this that is actually using something from Craft, so it actually is generating queries, is the current user up here. It is the CSRF token here, and it is these 3 entries. So really, this is a fairly lightweight page, I would say, and yet it's taking a bit of time, and there are 42 queries just to generate it. And if you notice, there are 255 events being thrown, and that's okay. They're useful and they're there for a reason, but there's a lot of stuff happening just for this page rendering. There are 55 log messages, for example. So just by rendering this, let's say it was a home page, we would be, going through this entire process, or PHP would have to go through this entire process. So let's enable Blitz. I do need to jump over here and disable the debug toolbar. Blitz will not cache the page when the debug toolbar is displayed for obvious reasons. You don't want that to end up in the cache. So I need to disable that for the moment. And now that's disabled, I'm also going to use, so I'm not going to have the debug toolbar available to me, but I'm going to use the network tab. And I'm just interested in the doc request types. So there we go. You see, like, there's our waterfall that you talked about. Mm-hmm. And here's the browser waiting for the first byte to come back from the server, 1.38 seconds. And I generally like hit refresh a few times just so I see what kind of numbers we're talking about. And I'll actually turn on preserve log and hit refresh a couple of times. And then we'll get this kind of like, we'd be able to average this out to probably between, it's gone up a bit, 1.3, 1.4 seconds. And now I'm going to switch caching to on. And I need to tell Blitz what URI patterns to cache. I could go for a wildcard, cache every page, but I'm just going to cache this page that we're looking at, which is called live stream. So save this. Now we've enabled Blitz caching. I haven't shown you this, but and I don't think we'll go into this because this is very specific to Blitz, but Blitz has an option for server rewrites, which means that it can bypass PHP completely. And in this case, it'll be Nginx, which will serve up the cached HTML file. So we're going to see a significant difference. Do you want to take a guess at what it's going to end up taking once
I'm going to
caching is
say 400 milliseconds.
All right. So I'll do a refresh. I expect that page is not yet cached. I'm not sure if I cleared the cache earlier, so we'll see if it takes the same amount of time. It did.
All right, I'm going to remove your video just so everybody can see the whole thing.
Oh, it's in the way. Yeah.
There we go.
So that took the same amount of time because the page had not yet been cached. But this time, after that request, the page should have been cached. And if I refresh, then I get a very fast
Wow.
load time of 17 milliseconds, which is crazy, right?
So
But if
just
you
to be
think about it,
clear, what happened is that Blitz isn't going, or nothing's going behind the scenes and warming the cache here, right? It's whatever the next page load of that page is going to create the cached file.
correct, yeah. So we're essentially bypassing PHP completely. So normally when I go to a URL like this, the entry point for Craft is the index.php file, right?
Mm-hmm.
That exists in the public web folder. And I've set up a server rewrite, and this is documented, so that's why I don't want to necessarily do this now. But there's a little bit of code that you can use, and I'm using Apache. No, I'm not using Apache. I'm using Nginx. So Nginx will say, okay, well this page has already been cached. I see it in a folder on the file system. So rather than route this request through PHP, I'm just going to serve back that cached file. And you can see the file size is the exact same as it was before.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is essentially the same, except that the response time is 17 milliseconds, which is crazy.
What did I say? 400? Okay.
I
Yeah.
think you said 400.
Yeah.
That's
Maybe
okay.
if it was going through PHP, it would have been close to that. But
Yeah, if it was going through PHP, it would probably be like 200 or 300 possibly.
mm-hmm.
Again, it depends on, how much stuff it has to process. Another thing to keep in mind though is that this is with zero latency. So normally my request has to go through the interwebs to the server, and then Nginx would, like I already explained, intercept the request and send it back to me. And there's always going to be a little bit of latency involved with that. So it's not going to be 17 milliseconds when this site is actually on the internet and I'm accessing it from my local computer. Here I'm accessing a site that's on my local computer from my local computer. So there's basically zero latency. But this is a pretty impressive number. And this is like one of the compelling cases. When I show this to people, like they're often amazed. Like I don't know what X, like what factor
even if it was 5 times
improve the
that,
performance.
right? Which it would be pretty impressive.
But it's more like what, I don't know, I can't even do the math, but 30 times or something.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is just the setup. I mean, so Blitz can, with the Nginx rewrites, it can be really fast.
Yes, and that's what we're going for. That's the case for Blitz or for static caching in general.
But now we have this completely static page, though.
Yes. So let me take this URL. Let me open it in an incognito tab. Oops. Are you still seeing?
Yep, still seeing your browser. Okay, that's not good.
That's not good.
Because you shouldn't be logged in at all. Like if you went to the Craft control panel URL, you should be
I'm not logged in. Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is obviously not what we want, and that's the worst case. Up here, that's the biggest mistake. The second one is that this form is going to fail, and the third one is that these are not random anymore. Each time I refresh the page, we're going to get the same 3. Now, Blitz has its own solution for this, dynamic content. So it's possible with Blitz to use this tag, craft.blitz.getURI. There's a few more like get template as well. And that allows you to pass in a template, and in the background, tell you what, we're going to do this as well. We're going to do this as well very quickly. So I'm just going to copy this, and we'll see how Blitz has its own solution to get around this. So time to go back into code editor. I'm going to turn caching off, because if we try to test this, we're just going to get the cached version each time, right? So I need to disable caching, and I'm going to clear the cache as well, just so that we're sure that we have nothing there that's being returned. And this is important because disabling the caching, I get asked this a lot. Disabling the caching doesn't mean that the cached version will no longer be served. It just means that no pages will be cached in the future. So especially if you're using server rewrites, you need to make sure, okay, I see that there is still one cached page. Let's go clear that. And that should make the page dynamic again. Okay, let's go into our code editor. So I'm going to be working here in this live stream folder, and I've essentially got a layout. So I have some CSS code, and I have Tailwind, and I have a content block. What else do I have in here? And I have the sprig.script file. So that will create a script file for me that will pull down HTMX, which is the library, that JavaScript library that Sprig requires. I've also pulled in Hyperscript because I'm using that for something up here, just to evaluate it. I think it has some potential, and I think there'll be a dev mode FM episode on it. Anyway, I don't want to get too sidetracked. So this is our layout, and here's our index page, which extends that layout, and here's the content block. So if you've worked with Tailwind a lot, you'll be used to this. If you haven't, this looks shockingly horrible, but this is the kind of thing you get also from Tailwind UI when you get these pre-built components. It looks beautiful in the UI, in the code, not so much so. You get like these very heavy classes and lots of embedded divs. But that's what we're working with here. So let's see, we have this include, and we're including this account status. And if I jump over to that, we're going to see that this is just checking, does the current user exist? And if they do, then output the image and my account. Otherwise, a button that just has login. And that is working correctly as long as the site is not statically cached. So I cleared the cache, so now we should see
Now we get
this
the login.
situation. Yeah, there we go. But we want that to work regardless of whether this page is cached or not. So I did mention that Blitz provides its own solution. So I'm using the output tags for the include. Like, a lot of people might be wondering, what even is this? Because a lot of people might use the twig tag. But the function actually is more semantically correct, because this tag is like, a tag is not supposed to be used for outputting something. This is the output tag in Twig, right? So we're outputting the value of the include. And there's a few minor differences, but I've come to really enjoy using this, the function, the include function over the tag. And there's some benefits to it as well, which are documented. I think it's even recommended in the Twig docs. All right, so rather than include it, we're going to use this craft.blitz.get template. We don't have any parameters, so I can remove that. And essentially what that is going to do is, well, let's take a look at the source code. That's always the best way to explain these things. All right, so refresh the page. And as you see that, so I'm not sure if you saw that, but the page loaded without a button. And then a few seconds later, it appeared, correct? Yeah. So if I open, so I've got only doc selected. I'm going to also select fetch.
Yeah.
So what happened? Let me look at the source code. Actually, we're not going to see it in the source code anymore. But essentially what happened, because it's been replaced by this button, but what happened when we output that get template tag is that Blitz created a kind of a placeholder here. There it is, yeah. So it's got this span, it's got a class of Blitz inject, and essentially that was a placeholder that Blitz knew about, and there was nothing in it, and that's why we basically just saw an empty corner up here. And what happened is that Blitz, on page load, it went and it fetched the result of this template, which is this dynamic code, right? Because as I just showed you, this was the case where we're logged in. And if we were not logged in, then the login button would be sent back in the response. And then Blitz has gone ahead and replaced that placeholder span with the actual content of that button. So this is pretty nice because now we're able to do this up here. We'd be able to do it also for the CSRF token. Blitz even has a CSRF input tag that helps us with that. And then we'd be able to do the same thing down here for our random entries. So Blitz kind of provides its own solution already, and different static caching methods might provide their own solutions too. In this case, it's nice to work with because you can basically take the include and just convert it into this, right? So you're still working with Twig. You don't have to learn a different syntax, like Varnish has its own syntax, for example. So you can basically carry on working as you normally do. You just switch the syntax a little bit. But the downside here is that you have very little control over how that replacement actually takes place. So if I just refresh the page now and you watch over the top right, you see how it kind of pops into place after the fact, after the page loads, and there's a little bit of jank. So these elements, this navigation kind of drops down a few pixels. And that's not only off-putting to the eye, but it's also something that Google and their algorithms tend to penalize because you have this visual jank that happens. And really, your page, once loaded, the elements on your page should not move around.
That's actually an accessibility concern, right? Didn't I think, if I remember correctly, there's a presentation at .all about that, right? But they
do
can measure
remember
based on
that was mentioned.
Yeah, if the UI moves, it adjusts the accessibility ranking of it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So that's something we want to avoid, and we probably could. We could either target, we could probably put a placeholder div and make sure that this area doesn't change in size. So we could probably work around this, but I want to look at Sprig because Sprig provides us some different ways of approaching this, and it definitely provides more flexibility as well. So I want to move straight to Sprig also in terms of time. So this was, what was it? Include. And I've got Sprig installed on the site, and all I need to do is change the include to Sprig.
So that's as if I was including a Sprig component, right? Just in a typical Sprig setup.
Yes, that's right. So what I tend to do is if I have includes, then I put them in an includes folder. And if I have components, then I put them in a components folder, because then it's clear to me what's an include and what's a component, because they work slightly differently. So I'm going to create a new folder here and call that components. I'm just going to copy these includes and put them in here. And then we'll be working with these from now on. So I should change that too. So now I've changed the path to my template, and that's all Sprig accepts, right? Just a path to the template, or alternatively, the name of a PHP class. But that's a video. I think
we did that, right?
Last stream we were on.
There's a video on Craft Quest for that.
Yep. Yes, that was the last one we did together, actually, Brian. And then this accepts other parameters too. So for anybody, I notice people are saying they've never used the include function. The include function is nice because you pass it in the path of the template, and then the second parameter is any params that you want. So for example, so the equivalent of this with the tag would be, so you include your template and then you have to say with, right? And it's this kind of unusual syntax, and then you can say only. So you can pass them in and you can say only. Well, here it works a bit more like we're used to with programming languages, that first parameter is this, second parameter is this, and then you can pass other parameters such as, I forget what it is now, with only, let's see, with context. So if we don't want to pass the context in, so in other words, we don't want anything besides these parameters to be passed into the include, then we can set with context. I think it looks like this, false. So normally when you include a template, the parent, so this this template's entire context, so all of the variables that are available here are passed into this included template along with any parameters that you pass in, unless you set with context to false. In that case, only parameter 1 will be available now in this template. And this, the reason I point this out is because Sprig works slightly different to an include. With Sprig, it's almost like having with context equals false, and you can't change that because a Sprig component is something that can be rendered via an AJAX request. So passing the entire context of the template is not feasible. It would make that request completely bloated, and you might even expose sensitive data because it goes over the wire, so you're able to inspect it in your browser DevTools. So what Sprig does is it only passes in the parameters that you give it explicitly here. And this is something that some people get tripped up by. So if I have, for example, I have a variable, set x equals 1 or z equals 1, and then I do something in my component with z, it'll tell me z's not available.
Right, it's not defined,
so all I need to do is pass it in here. All right, but we don't need that here because we weren't passing anything into the account status. The account status is just determining are we logged in or not. All right, so here's account status. And we're going to do the same thing. And we're going to check if the current user is logged in, otherwise log them in. But the important thing to note is that with a Sprig function, it works like an include the first time. So whatever the result of this is, the first time, so when this page is rendered, so this is also going to be rendered. And the result of that is going to be output here. Now, what's special about a component is that you can have interactive parts to it. So normally speaking, if you have a button that you click on, you can have that template re-render itself. And I guess we need to assume that there's a basic knowledge of how Sprig works. We've done tons of videos on Sprig running together, so I don't want to go into the foundational stuff too much. But one of the types of interactions that you can have, it's not only clicks and hovers and mouse overs, things like that. You can also have on load and on reveal. And that's what we're interested in here. But let's verify that this works first. So over in my browser, just want to make sure nothing is broken. And there was no jank here because, like I said, this is working just like an include the first time. And I haven't put any Sprig attributes on, so there's nothing special about this component so far. But we're going to have the same problem. If I statically cache this page, then my profile photo is going to be visible to everybody, regardless of whether they're logged in or not. So here's what we have to do. We need to tell Sprig, first of all, second parameter was the variables that we want to pass in. We don't need to, but the third parameter allows us to pass in attributes. And the one that we're interested in here is s-trigger. Oh, typing and talking.
Welcome to my life, Ben.
By default, the trigger that every component has is called refresh. So you can manually refresh a component. But we're able to manipulate that here, and I'm able to say on load. And what this does is that each time this component is loaded, it's going to trigger a re-rendering or a refresh. So let's look at what that looks like in the network tab. I refresh the page. There's our initial load.
Yeah, another request. Yeah.
Yeah, and there we go. There's
So
our
re-rendering that component.
Request. Yes, it is re-rendering that component. And that's why we see something different, even though it looks very similar to the example we saw with the Blitz dynamic tag. If I refresh the page again, you'll see there's no jank, right? Because the initial value is the same as the re-rendered value. So that request returned, where is it? Here we go. It returned my account with an image. I don't know why it's not appearing there.
And what is
but it is there.
what's the raw, like the output on load before, like the rendered like output?
It's actually
Before
going to
the
be the exact
reloads?
same.
It's that.
Yeah,
Okay.
it is that, because what happens is that this is executed once on page load, and then a second time via that fetch request.
Okay.
But this opens up possibilities for us.
Yeah, I'm
because
trying
what
to.
I can
That's what
now do.
I'm trying to figure out how you're going to get there. Okay.
Right. So what I can do is I can say if sprig dot is request. In other words, if this is a fetch request rather than an include, which would be is include. So we have these conditionals available to us, so we understand the context in which this sprig component is actually being rendered in. So if it's a sprig request, then do all of this logic. And now I'm going to put in an else. Now we have our default case. So let me just save this and we'll do nothing. And if I refresh the page, we should see that jank again. Yeah, just like we did before. But now I have possibilities, because now I have the case. Like, what do I want to display before this is dynamically rendered? So if for example, I was on a site where the majority of people are not logged in and there are only a couple of members, then I'd probably do something like this. Let's look at what that looks like. So we're going to see login initially, and then it jumps to my account. That may not be what we want. I noticed a bit of jank. I thought I'd fix that up. I probably just need to change some of the padding just to make sure that those buttons are the same height. The alternative is I could say, well, I assume that most users will be logged in. So I'm gonna get rid of the image. I'm just gonna say my account. And then I'll refresh this page. See, the default is my account. And then here it bumps into my photo. If I do this in incognito window and hit enter, then it switches to login.
Okay.
So I guess the point here is that we have possibilities available to us. How do we want to render this dynamic content?
Well, we're not
So with
caching
Blitz,
yet, right? We have Blitz off at this point still.
we do have Blitz off. Okay. But here's the thing: the result is going to be the exact same. And that's where it gets really interesting, because that means that we can do this anywhere on our page. We can start injecting dynamic content anywhere we want. And the result is going to be the same, because whatever I choose here for this else, which is saying this is not a Sprig dynamic request, this is going to be the default output.
That's what'll be cached.
Correct.
Okay.
So that is important to understand, that we have if Sprig is request and is include, which would be the opposite of is request, are available to us. All right. How are we doing on time? We're good.
Yeah.
I think we're going to jump to, let's jump to the form. That's just next in line. So we're going to see something very similar. So I'm just going to copy this. We're going to see an include once I reach it. Here's our include. Instead of account status, it's going to be sign up form. And same thing, right? I want on page load, I want this to re-render itself. And if I look in the sign up form, I've just got a basic form with a CSRF input field. Now we're actually not going to, when I refresh this page, we're not going to see anything. We will see that dynamic fetch actually. Yeah. And interestingly, now you notice there are two of them. So there's one
for each component
up here, and there's one down here. So you might wonder, okay, well, is this a good thing? We've taken what would normally be one single request and we've turned it into three. That first one obviously is cached, so that doesn't really count. So you could say we've turned it into two dynamic requests. And when we dynamically output the random selection of articles, that might be three. So is this even a good thing? I think it's good to note here, like, how heavy are these requests? We're basically just outputting a little bit of markup, and we've just got a single conditional: is the user logged in? And down here, what is the condition? We don't even have a condition. So I think what we're essentially doing is we're kind of pushing the slow, or what am I trying to say? The blocking requests, or the slow blocking requests, to the end.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I know what I'm trying to say. We're lazy loading, right? So we're eager loading the cached page. This is taking 2.28 seconds, but with Blitz enabled, that will be much, much quicker. And we'll enable Blitz in a moment. I just want to get through these, otherwise we'll have to keep clearing the cache. So we'd have a very eagerly loaded cached version of the page, and then we would lazily load these elements. Now, so again, why would you not just use Blitz for this and Blitz's dynamic content tag? Well, we can start doing some really interesting things. Like currently, what do I even get? I think I just get the default success message, which is far from ideal, right? It takes you, the entire context of the page is changed, and it takes you away from what you're working on. So we could redirect the user back to this page and show a message or something. But Sprig allows us to make this form interactive, which means that we never even need to leave this page or even refresh the page. And rather than typing all of this up, I think I'll just copy something that I prepared earlier, and we can look at it briefly. So where are we? Just need to get my bearings. There's so many classes in this code. Okay, so this goes.
You just have a little success message at the bottom.
Yeah. So I have this if success is defined, and success, in other words, success is truthy rather than false. Then we're going to show like this success message, and we're going to replace the form. So what I need to do is I need to take everything that is in the form and put that in the else, which means this was not a success. We've just, loaded the form. And another thing I've done is I've made a case for if there are errors, then we're going to output the errors. Yeah. So what we're essentially doing is we're going to turn this form into an interactive form by Sprigifying it. And this is one of those things that we've done in many videos previously that I don't want to go into in a lot of detail. But let's just look at the changes I need to make. So one is I need to.
While you're doing that, we've done it in a videos that you and I worked on with Sprig in different forms. I did a registration, front end registration flow series of videos where I use Sprig as the reactive tool for that. So if anyone's interested in the basics of that, check that out.
Yeah. All right. So you just added lots of series on Sprig.
Right. So you just added Sprig and then S method.
Right. And then which tells Sprig, make sure that this is submitted as a post request. And then I can say S action. I'm saying this is the action that I want to submit to. So rather than submitting to the subscribe form action directly, I want Sprig to route this through its own mechanism. That also means that Sprig takes care of the CSRF input for me, so I can remove these 2 lines of code. And that's essentially it. That's the only change I have to make this form interactive. But let's take a look and see if we did that right. No. All right, I think I'm just missing an if statement. So if success, else, if errors, end if. Yeah, missing an end if. This is why indentation is so important.
It's hard
So
when you're
important.
on a small screen too.
Yeah, but I sometimes people will share their code with me, and I'm like, what happened to the indentation here? Like, and this is why it's important. So I can scroll down and I can see where's my else. Oh, here it is. It's on the same column, right? It's one tab in. And one nice tip is if you want, if you get like messed up code, and sometimes I'll do this even if I copy paste code from. I never copy paste code, but if I do, then it's from Tailwind UI. You can go up here, at least in PHP Storm, and you can say reformat code. Sorry, that's if you select the code, you can reformat the entire file too.
Yep.
And it will like correct the indentation for you automatically, which is really, really nice.
I use it a lot, especially as I'm shuffling things around and refactoring something, and things just get a little bit wonky. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So we should have
Let's
that working.
see. Yeah, let me open the network tab because we would expect to see a fetch request. There we do. There it goes. And boom. So this is such a better flow, I think, because we haven't left the page. We haven't, even if I was to refresh the page and show this message, like we would be up at the top again, right? We wouldn't be in our scroll position. So this is so nice, I think, as a UX tool, because it keeps the user within the flow. They're like, oh, okay, check, I've done this part. Now I can move down, see what else there is to do on this page. I find it a very satisfying feeling to get this and not be thrown out of my flow.
Agreed.
So that is the possibility that Sprig allows us to do with the Blitz dynamic tag. We would not be able to do any of this. It would allow us to regenerate that CSRF token, but not do this interactive stuff. And that finally brings us to down here. And this is interesting because if you notice, this is above the fold, and that's why we had to deal with these on page load. But down here, this is below the fold. So we have some more options available to us. Let me start off with the same thing. So here's our include. We're going to include the random entries and the component version as before. And let me let's just start off with the load trigger for now. And jump back here. So we're going to see something a bit strange. Let me open. Oh, okay, there it went. I wasn't patient enough. So I'll refresh the page and we can watch together what happens. When the page loads, we have these 3.
2, 3.
Boom. So I don't know if you noticed, but the page loaded with 3, and then that fetch request replaced those with another 3 randomly selected.
I was watching the dev tools. Okay.
Okay. I distracted you with that. I'll do it again. Refreshing. Boom.
There it goes. Yep.
Yeah. Now this isn't such a big deal because when we're using Blitz, this isn't going to happen anymore. Oh, I'm sorry. Of course it is. It's going to keep happening with Blitz. The difference is that when this page is cached, we won't get a different 3 each time I hit refresh. We'll get the same 3, but there will be that effect where they switch into something else. So we want to avoid that, and we also want to avoid jank. So I don't want, when I load the page, that there's basically nothing here, just the footer, and then this pops into place and pushes the footer down. So one very low-tech solution to this is if I jump over to random entries and up here, and I use the same trick as before. So if Sprig dot, there we go, is request. So again, only if this is a Sprig request do I want to output. I think I've gone too far. No, I haven't. If this is a Sprig request, then we want to output the dynamic entries. Otherwise, oh, that's what it is. It's up here. I thought I was being so smart by putting this code in here for me as a reference. I just forgot that I need to figure out where to put the code. Okay. Let me uncomment that, and then we'll talk through what we're doing here. We need an end if. All right, so I'm saying in the else, so if this is not a dynamically rendered Sprig request, then I'm looping over the range 1 to 3, which will essentially just output the same piece of code 3 times. And I've basically built here just using CSS kind of placeholders, which you'll see in a moment. If I refresh the page, we'll see the effect that I was going for.
Yep.
Yeah, which is these kind of placeholders. And then it pops into
Nice.
place, which I think looks much better.
And I assume no one would see this on a typical screen, but they could. Like I've actually made my external displays horizontal before. I'm sorry, vertical. So I would probably have seen it, but that's a common pattern. That's something that everyone is used to seeing now.
That's a good point, though. Above the fold is also relative, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
it depends on what monitor you're viewing the page on. But you bring up a good point, because if I refresh the page here, on page load, we're rendering those 3 dynamic parts of the page. And what's interesting is, as I mentioned earlier, the events that we trigger this on is up to us. So I've used load, but I can also use, I've forgotten if it's reveal or revealed. I think it's reveal. So let me come back here and I'll refresh the page, clear the network history.
2.
So here you see it's only the 2, the first 2. And let me scroll down the page. And as soon as I reveal these, that third one should go off and replace that. I bet it's revealed instead of reveal. I got it mixed up. So take 2, we scroll down, we arrive here, and it pops into place. Yeah. So it doesn't look so bad. It has the added benefit of, if the user never scrolls down, then we never have to make this extra request to the server. So you could say, introduce a server load for a site with high traffic. And obviously this isn't very far down, but quite often you have like a landing page like this that just goes on and on and on, and it's totally acceptable that things don't come into focus or aren't even revealed until you're down there and it's within the viewport. So this is a nice strategy to use as well.
All right, so we have the whole thing Sprigified, right?
Yes, we do.
And
there's one thing I want to do before. Are you suggesting we?
Well, I didn't know if it was time to now test it against the Blitz cache as well.
It is time, but just before we do that, I want to see what effect this has had on our request, because this is interesting. So I don't know if you remember earlier, I wanted to make a mental note. I think it was 42 database queries we had on page load. And I think it took, I think I said about 1.3 seconds, something like that.
Yep.
So I've re-enabled the debug toolbar. And now we see a significant difference. The database queries are only 15, which is interesting. So as we've taken out these dynamic pieces, the number of database queries has greatly been reduced and the time is significantly faster. So I think I got on average 1.3 before, or 1.4, and now I'm getting like 1 or 1.1. So what we're seeing is that this page has become lighter, the initial page. And I can actually open up these two. This is a really cool feature. I can see Ajax requests in my debug toolbar. So I can go to one of these and I can see how many database requests did this make. 20, it looks like. So what we've done is that we've kind of, again, lazy loaded the loading of these components, and we can see that the result is that this main page is actually now really lightweight, especially in terms of database queries.
And I don't think
so that's a nice
even
side
loaded
effect.
there hasn't even been the queries yet for those articles down below, right? Because they haven't been revealed.
That's correct. Yeah. So we see that there are 2 AJAX requests.
Yep.
In theory, when I scroll down and these pop in, now we see that the
3.
third one. Yeah. So this is nice because, and I guess the general principle here is that anything above the fold should be dynamically rendered on page load, right? I mean, I could get really smart here. For example, I could say when the user, and this would be very, very easy to do with Sprig, when the user clicks in here or interacts with this form, then go fetch a new CSRF token. So I wouldn't even have to do it on page load, which would be a really interesting thing an interesting thing to do. Yeah. So you would kind of reduce this to just one AJAX request for this. And as we saw, that last one is lazy loaded completely. On, only when this part of the page is revealed.
All right.
I haven't been keeping an eye on the chat. Yeah, let's do it. I've not been keeping an eye on the chat. I'm sorry, but if anything's come up, then.
Yep, I think the only thing that came up, and it didn't come through the chat, it came through a message, I think, in Discord, and I got a text, is Andrew just wanted to highlight, or asked to highlight, the fact that caching is good for performance in terms of, getting good, giving good signals to Google for ranking, but also just like handling a high concurrency of requests if your site gets hit by a high traffic event, right? Then like that static caching, especially if you're routing it right to Nginx or to Apache, your server is going to be able to handle everything if PHP is out of the way much, much faster than it would if it was. Yeah,
that's very important. Like we tend to think of just the speed factor, but there's so many more benefits to that.
Yeah, I think we're also obsessed with it because we're we're also being asked to build sites that have good SEO as well. So
yeah, important. I don't know why this is not saving. It's strange. What is going on? Okay, let me override that because I think there's something else at play. I have so many. I have too many demo plugins here, so I'm just going to use the config setting to override this.
Sure.
So it was live stream,
and we're seeing people mention that they a little bit ago when you're using the include function that they haven't been using the include function. I don't use it myself, so it was a good thing to highlight for sure. All right, are we all set to test it?
Yeah, there are a few benefits. Like if you go read the docs, things like named parameters are really cool. It's a technical thing, but go read up on that. If we have time, I'll show it, but that's another benefit of using the function over the tag. Yes, so I have disabled the debug toolbar and I've enabled caching. So what do I want to do? Open the network tab, hit refresh. Oh dear. This is the live demo doom. What's going on here? What have I done, Ryan?
I don't know. Let's see. What did you already?
Undefined index URI pattern. But I've given you one. This is strange. So oh, come on. Okay, so I think what may be happening is that I have some dev version of Blitz here, and I've done something. I did something before the demo. So Blitz is actually not allowing this page to run.
So Ben, why you take a second and work through that, and I'm going to just quickly, you can ignore me talking. Just wanted to share, just so if there's anyone that is watching this either live or as part of the recording and you're not familiar with Sprig and what it can do, if you go to craftquest.io/topics and then find the Sprig topic, which is right here, there's 33 videos on Sprig. We have 5 courses and 3 live streams covering Sprig. So there's quite a bit of coverage there, including the one that I was referring. Well, I did a bunch with Ben on product filtering, building a reactive form. That's one we referred to earlier. Some commerce stuff, and then that really cool searchable filterable table that he did. And then I did one just a couple months ago on a set of front-end registration templates that someone could take and use as boilerplate with Sprig in it as well. So you kind of get some nicer forms. And if you're not interested in writing JavaScript, then you can just use Sprig and plug it right into your Twig templates. So check that out. And
Good news, Ryan.
What's up?
Good news. The live demo gods are on our side today.
Well, I'm glad my promotional aside was to a benefit of at least somebody. All right, so
did just the trick.
So we're looking now. You have caching enabled. I see the green switch.
Yes, I'm overriding that using that config setting. It all works now.
Great.
And I just refreshed the page. So this was the uncached version. So it took 1.3 seconds with those 2 dynamic page loads. And now it should be significantly quicker. There we go. So now we're getting like 15 milliseconds. So if I hit refresh, it's like almost instantaneous. It is instantaneous, 9 milliseconds. So we have that situation that we wanted, where we have an eagerly loaded cached main document. So in our waterfall, you see that the browser was only waiting less than 8 milliseconds to begin processing the request. And now I have these. Actually, let me switch to all. This is actually our full waterfall, right? So everything that the browser has to download, all of the images, all of the CSS and JavaScript files. And this is what the waterfall looks like. And now the waterfall can begin after only 8 milliseconds rather than 1.2 seconds. So it's not only the time to first byte that is affected by this, but the entire waterfall and loading process of the page.
So let me ask a dumb question, and that is, how are we getting these dynamic Sprig components loading if we're completely skipping like the Twig rendering and everything? We're just hitting directly to the cached file, right?
Yes. So the way that we're doing that is we're using the magic of JavaScript without having to write any JavaScript. So if I go look at the source code and I look for, well, let me search for Sprig, because that's where we're going to see our Sprig component. So this is what a component looks like. We have all these hx dash attributes. And here's the one we put on it, the s-trigger equals load. And this is what Sprig how Sprig renders this component in the end. And because we have HTMX also on this page, HTMX is then on page load, or when it processes this request and this script, it'll execute and it will scan this page for these hx attributes. And based on the values of those, it will do its thing. It will do its dynamic thing and go fetch these 2, because we've specified on load, and this one, of course, down here on reveal. So once this becomes revealed, that request will be made by HTMX, and we can see that it's HTMX here through the initiator.
So what is the source? That is, if you reload it again and scroll up, so those 3 articles component isn't showing, what is the source code for that unrendered article component look like then?
Oh, I see. So I can't show you in Elements, right? But I can view the source code.
Mm-hmm.
And if I again look for Sprig,
So it's my account.
so it's my account. So first of all, we have this kind of boilerplate kind of div, which Sprig creates, and it wraps our content.
Mm-hmm.
And the My Account button is, if I go to the correct account status. So on first page load, it's not a Sprig request. It's not a dynamic Sprig request. So it's going to be in the else statement. And here it is. Here's our button with the My Account link. And that's the same pattern we followed over here with random entries. We said in the condition that it is a dynamic request, then we execute the entry query.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't show this, but I think this is, everybody understands this, right? We're selecting the section, we're eager loading the related entries, or sorry, related elements, because this is assets. And we're ordering them randomly, limiting to 3, and then getting them all. But this only happens on the dynamic request. What happens on the static request initially is this
That
kind of all these placeholders.
But there's some Sprig, there's some JavaScript in there that then triggers the request in the in the static in the rendered HTML.
This is a Node.js demo, Ryan. So you're not going to see, you can look as hard as you want. You're not going to see any JavaScript.
Fascinating.
No, what happens here is that this is the rendered content, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
HTMX takes over there then.
Yeah. So here, I can try to find it for you exactly, but this is what HTMX is going to look for.
Got it.
And this is what is going to tell HTMX. So you can forget the data, right? That's optional.
Mm-hmm.
You could just write HX or even HTMX, I believe, -trigger equals load. HTMX finds this and says, and also this. So now we'd be getting into HTMX, right? But HTMX sees that this is HTMX script. It interprets it, and it executes the JavaScript code. But we haven't written a single line of code. Here.
Andrew says lies. There is JavaScript. So that's what I'm trying to unpack. Is that there is some JavaScript happening behind the scenes, but it's all via HTMX. It's totally off of those data attributes. I think that's what I was getting at.
I see.
This is a static HTML file essentially, and it's via those data attributes and the HTMX script that loads, and then it goes through and I assume crawls the DOM or whatever it does, and then fires those requests for those ones that are set for on load or for what was the other one? Revealed.
Yeah.
Got it.
So yeah, you're right. There is JavaScript, of course, but it's tucked down here, out of our way. We didn't even need to write the script tag for it. If you remember in the layout,
you just had the
down
Sprig
at the bottom,
tag,
I just
right?
used sprig.script, which really just translates to this, and everything else happens, without. This is what's so great about JavaScript, right? That you can write libraries which enable you to not write JavaScript. I mean, it's there if we want it, but if we don't need it, then we can just continue being happy in Twigland ever after, and we leverage the libraries that are available to us. And Sprig is leveraging HTMX so that we can continue writing our Twig code.
So Ben, in the chat, David asked, are there downsides to using lazy load components or to use this pattern in like a huge amount, so a large amount of these?
Well, there are always upsides and there are always downsides, right? So just to point out another upside, which Andrew was kind of getting at, I think, and I think I mentioned in the beginning, like if we have, here's a module, right? And I'm just going to write some gobbledygook, which obviously is not valid PHP. And provided this module is being bootstrapped, which it is. So normally in the control panel, why is it so big? If I refresh the page, like,
Yeah,
right, it's
parse error.
broken.
Yep.
Here's, right, that's not going to work. And neither is the home page, because this module is bootstrapped and this is the init method. So it's going to be called on every request. But if I go over here,
But not if you're
open the
cached.
network tab,
Yeah.
well, let's see what happens. I mean, it's not all, it's not all roses. But look, I refreshed and the page still works.
Yeah. Now your form is
But some things
broken
are
and
broken.
that, yeah.
Yeah, and this is not going to re-render, right? Because each of these requests results in an error, a 500 error internal server request or whatever it is. Sorry, internal server error. But that's okay, because we've set this page up in a way that you can tell something's not right, but like it doesn't mean that you can't read the page. The content is still here. The navigation will still work. Something's not right here. That's true. And the form may not work depending on who's logged in or not. But the site is still usable. So if this was really just a landing page or a landing site, then a lot of the content will still be up and available while the developers struggle to figure out, who broke it and what's the issue here. And as soon as then this is fixed and deployed, the fix is deployed, and the user comes back here, refreshes the page, this
Then it all
continues to
works.
work as before.
But if we,
Yeah.
this pattern of using, lazy loading these components, with David asking if there's a downside to it, I assume that the downside would be is if you had a lot of queries on a page, if you had 18 components loading and they took a long time to load, then that could be just a downside like anything else, but but you're getting so much savings from statically caching, in this case with Blitz, and routing it directly to Nginx, that it seems like it would probably be hard to get to a point where you're really killing your site.
Yeah. I want to come back to what I said in the very beginning, that it depends, right? Like,
Okay.
and it's always going to depend on your use case. Like I said, like for Craft Quest, maybe static caching is not relevant because maybe you have so much dynamic content, and you have like videos that take time to load. They're not loading in like under 200 milliseconds, right? So maybe in that situation it's okay. Or maybe a site where you have lots of content that's constantly changing and each user sees a different version of the homepage, where maybe only this header is static and everything else is dynamic. It probably doesn't make sense to do it this way, although it might. But if we think of the trade-offs, like, would you rather the page load in 1 second all at once, or would you rather that the majority of the content, the usable content on the page, loads in, what is this, 8 milliseconds, and the rest lazy loads in between 1 and 2 seconds in this case? And these numbers are going to be much, much lower. So when I say, between 1 and 2 seconds, this is probably going to be between, I don't know, 300 and 400 milliseconds or something on a live production site.
Yeah.
So, and if you remember, when I had the debug toolbar open, we went from 42 requests on the homepage to 15 in that first load. And then the other database requests were processed in these two dynamic requests. So we're just shifting where the processing happens, and we're splitting it up from one single request to the PHP server to Craft, and we're turning that into two smaller requests because we've been able to extract a lot of content here and cache it. And as I mentioned before, like this image is not coming from an asset, and this text is not coming from an entry. But if it was, then that would be many, many more database queries on the homepage to render all of these, the navigation and the top, and whoever these companies are. These would all be database queries that would be saved because we'd be able to cache those. So it's difficult to give a yes or no answer. Are there any downsides to lazy loading? The downsides maybe are that you need to think about these things, and you need to understand how this is going to affect the loading of your page, rather than, if you just did it all the traditional way, then this would just be dynamic every time.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to take advantage of the benefits of static caching, then you're going to have to understand these and put them into practice. These things that we've looked at.
Very cool. I think this is not an approach that I have used, and I'm very intrigued by using Sprig in this way. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, I just see in the comment that Andrew says concurrency is the number one reason, and I think you tried to bring that up to me earlier as well. So yeah, if our pages, so in this case we have like 3 dynamic components, but if you have pages that don't have dynamic components and you can cache them, then you can serve so much more traffic and you can serve it so much more quickly because your load is not under stress when you get large amounts of traffic, because your server, well, let's say Craft and PHP, has to do much less work on each request. In this case, with a statically cached page, with the server redirect, Nginx just reroutes this to the file itself, serves it back to you, and PHP doesn't even spin up. So I've seen, for example, companies who've gone from like very large, intricate and complex load balanced setups to make sure that, during high periods of traffic, they can spin up extra load balanced servers and serve that traffic, switching to a single server with statically cached pages. And the beauty with a statically cached page is that it doesn't really matter how many requests you get. The server will be able to deal with it without any issues. On the other hand, like I said, here we have these extra 2 requests. So you are going to have that trade-off of, everything is not static. So you still need to consider, okay, well, the server will still be under load, but that will be greatly reduced. And if, in a site where you don't have a login, for example, everybody sees the same version of the page, you're going to be able to statically cache more and therefore reduce those dynamic requests to the server.
Yeah, it almost seems silly to dynamically generate the same page for 1 million different people.
Yeah. And Andrew's saying it saves money and performs better. Yeah, it saves you money, and it's a simpler setup than a complex load balance setup. It's like less DevOps, so it's more robust, and it saves money in the long term. So there's this work that has to be done up front, but hopefully what you've seen today is that the tools are there, and Sprig being one of them, that allows you to inject this dynamic content into what otherwise would be a statically cached page.
I could definitely see on some pages where I could take advantage of this on CraftQuest and on some other sites as well. So I think this is it's good. Hopefully it was helpful to everyone that watched. Definitely helpful to me, Ben. Thank you for taking the time to go over this. I know it's late where you are. If I'm sure a lot of you already know about Ben's work at Put Your Lights On. Do check that out. All of his plugins and articles. Ben has also written about. Did you write about caching as well? I can't remember if you've written about caching or not. Securing your craft site. Check out everything that Ben does over at Put Your Lights On, and then on Twitter you are at Ben_PYLO. Is that correct? At Ben Pilo.
That's correct.
That is.
Yeah, look at the logo and you'll see why.
Yeah, it only took me. How long have I known you? It only took me years to figure that out. Ben, thanks so much
Ryan,
for hanging out with us and for jumping on it and doing this demo. This is super cool. For those of you that are watching live, this will be up on the CraftQuest site as a recorded live stream. So you'll be able to replay that, and we'll make it publicly available so it's free to everybody, and they can check out the good stuff that Ben's working on here.
right.
Ben,
Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks so much, and thanks for everyone for tuning in. And we'll see you on the next live stream. Take care.
Bye-bye.